education material contained herein is meant to promote the Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us on the Keshe American Knowledge Team meeting. And here we are, another beautiful Sunday afternoon to discuss some very important changes that are going on in our lives. It's uncharted territory, isn't it? And this is what we're trying to navigate. So I want to thank you all for participating today because, you know, we are the cleanup crew every Thursday. Rick Crammond does his Knowledge Seekers workshops, and then Friday the Brazilian team puts their presentation, and then here we are trying to sort it all out with our North American intelligence. So as we go forward, we try and navigate so and here we go. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the basic nano tech state, and the subject today is switchboards. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is June the 8th of 2025, and this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. Here we are trying to bring together all the knowledge in a condensed form so that the new knowledge seekers can unravel it. As you can see, we've been doing this an awfully long time. And today we're going to be discussing switchboards. This is part of the nanotech stage, which is an evolution of our understanding of the knowledge. And we try and present it in such a way that it's a little bit more concise. Also to offer different opportunities for mature knowledge seekers to be able to present, and also for the new knowledge seekers to have a different point of view. What's most important is that we don't leave anybody behind in this whole process. So what we're going to be working at is trying to give different points of view, different ideas, and you need to be comfortable. You need to be comfortable in understanding the science in your way to be able to present the science in your way. and also to take into account uh, who your audience is. So we are trying to advance the science at the same time and keep a connection to the beginner stage. Literally, we're all beginners. So this is all part of the cache technology as presented by Marin Tevakoli Cache in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And then we see how the matter, antimatter, and dark matter comes together. And it's coming together as a creation of matter. So what we see is a product. And it's connected to, as we see in book number 2, the structure of the light. And so in coming together as a product, it's coming from somewhere as a product. Same type of combination. And where is that coming from? And this is a good question. We try and answer that in book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. And often we were kind of confused. Should that be book number 1? Well, it's still hard to tell, because what we have is the splitting up of the one universe into 2 sub-universes. So we have the sister universe and our man's universe, and we can see that our universe is a lot smaller. And also our universe is something that we ignore because we only want that little small portion of that universe, that little tiny pie in the sky, which we call Earth space. And that Earth space is our planet. It's a one planet. And as such, we're one nation, the human race. And as such, we only have one race for justice and world peace. So if you only have the one race and you only have the one nation and you only have the one planet, then you only have the one winner. In our society, when there are winners, there are also losers. But in the race for life, there are no losers. There are only members of the Universal Council. And so coming together with Rick Crammond bringing 381 weeks in a row, this one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace is going to have greater significance because we're only seeing it from one point of view. And a lot of people are trying to sort it out because there's something else that's going on in the background which we can't see. And that's what we want to discuss, because today's subject is switchboards. So we understand switchboards as things it's a board that you plug things into. So we have these male connectors and these female plugs. And then the question becomes which connector goes to which plug? And is that the only connector? Does it stay there, or can it move around? And then we really have to ask the question is who is making the decision which connector goes to which plug? And then how do you decide what you're connecting? And then how do you actually do that? Because what is not shown in this picture is the switchboard operator. And for many of us who were a little bit older, we remember the switchboard operator. And when we used to place long distance phone calls, we would actually have to engage the operator and literally ask them to do the connection. And they would do this connection through a massive switchboard. And that's what they did all day long. Plug it in and unplug it and move it around. And so this becomes part of the switchboard. So in the plasma science, we have a different kind of switchboard where it's giving the higher strength is feeding the weaker strength. And what is switched around here is that in our society, the higher strength eats the weaker strength. And so we have to switch that around. In other words, the point of view of it being a point of conflict when 2 fields come together is actually a binding zone. And so there is an involvement of these 2 fields. Now, if you want to say it's a conflict, or if you want to say it's a cooperation. Whatever you say, it's an inertia density manifestation. And this is what we need to connect into, because we are trying to connect to the plasma science, because that's where all the energy comes from. And so now we have to differentiate what is the difference between the matter state and the plasma state, or what is the difference between the physical state and the energy state. And so these are all the questions that we have. So when we look at energy binding, that is very important, because we all need to be self-serving in that regard, because we do have needs, and no one knows your needs better than you do. But when we have some people who are deciding that you don't need as much as you think you do, or we have needs and our needs are more important than your needs, so that self-serving energy binding is at the expense of others. And so that's how they're plugged in. And it's unfortunate, because that's not how we were plugged in to get here. And so there has to be a switch, if you will, where we cut the one switch where we do the self-serving at the expense of others and plug into the universe, which is unconditional energy provision. And so this sheds a lot of light on one of the most important of the Ten Commandments, which is not even in the Ten Commandments, but it's the 11th commandment: thou shalt not lie. And the reason this is obviously important is because in our physicality, we have the opportunity to lie and not actually take into account the consequences of that lie. And we, in fact, downplay that lie, and then, in fact, we lie to ourselves that we didn't lie. And the question really comes is, why do we have these commandments? Not only do we have 10, but now we have a supplement of another 14 commandments for a total of 24 commandments. My dog doesn't have these commandments, but I have to have these commandments. So why is that? And as we've always said, why is not the question, why is the answer? So obviously, we need these commandments. Is that your opinion? Do you share that opinion? Or is that opinion just presented to you by someone else, and then you have to assume that that is the correct opinion? What about the carrots? Do they have commandments? Or spinach? Or stones? Do the stones have commandments? Maybe thou shalt not throw stones when you live in a glass house. I'm really not sure about all of this, except that what we're looking for is vitality enhancement. And the reason for that is because we are short. We are down in terms of our fuel. And so we like to connect to a new fuel where we have the emotional vitality enhancement and the physical vitality enhancement. And so we don't just connect with one, but we have to connect with the other, because we find that we have to double up in terms of what we're getting. So we need the regular physicality, but we need a super grade of the emotional vitality, and you bring those two together, and now you have really a lot of power. And so that gets you on the transmutation highway. And so, well, wait a second, why can't we get on the transmutation highway without that? Where are we exactly? Well, we're on the lowest energy state. We're on the transmission highway. And so there's a problem with that, because we are only looking at it from one side. Everything else, whether it's the transition highway or the transmutation highway, is actually a carbon inertia highway. So the transmutation is a combination of carbon-16 and carbon-8, but the transition highway is a combination of carbon-14 and carbon-10. So both of those total up to be carbon-24, And here we are in the lowest energy state. We only have a carbon 12. So there must be another 12 there that we're not seeing, which would kind of even things out. But they said, let there be light. So if that light is supposed to come, then we are kind of in the shade, wouldn't you say? And so the light is kind of on the other side. And maybe that's the other part that's missing in the carbon inertia highway. So, but we can clearly see that there is an inertia field created with the carbon highway in the physical side. So there is then a connection to the other side. So the question then comes is, how do we switch? And where exactly is this switchboard? And how do we make all of these connections? So what we have to realize is that when we change one, then we can change the other. So our field of reference then becomes quite important. And so this is why when we talked about the cups of life, we had two cups. And these were the embodiment of the nanocoding process of the monatomic science. So we found that we had our energy that was emanating from our core space, that was part of our inner space, and manifest in the emotional strength, which really encompassed both the emotional and the physical strength. And so we know that you can be very physically motivated, but if you're not emotionally motivated, you're not going to move very fast. So we extended that to the production of GANs, and we found that we had this GANs radiance manifestation where not only were we able to enhance the emotional and the physical, but we had other GANSs like carbon dioxide and calcium, copper, and zinc GANSs. And then, of course, the real mystery had to do with the water GANs and the amino acid GANs. And if we understand and remember that oil and water don't mix, then when we're producing the GANSs, we're talking about differentiating the energy fields. And then, of course, we can extend that and create the gold as well. And we've proven that. So one of the things that we've always proven in our basic philosophy is that we were not talking about the cups of the pandemic, but we were talking about the cups of the soul. And so we see that each cup has a magnetical gravitational relationship and a positioning for the soul. And when the cups come together, which we're talking about the emotional cup, the physical cup, and the cup of the soul, when they come together, they also have a magnetical gravitational relationship and also have a new position of the soul. So it becomes a collective soul. And so that is our representation of the physical manifestation. But when we look at the cup of the universe, it is operating by the same rules. And so we have this hemispheric convergence coming through our left and right brain. And each one has to come together with the copper, which is the physical GANs, and the zinc, which is the emotional GANs, and then, of course, with the carbon, which is the connection to the universe. And so we see here where 1 + 1 + 1 brings together the three of the cup of the universe. But, that's just the beginning because we also have the physical manifestation of our body, which also encapsulates the brain. So we have more than three. And then, in addition to that, the Earth itself has its own grand central station of all of these Earth ganses. And they are all there, and each one has a characteristic. They each one show a kind of color. And you can say that they have a specific color or a general color, but we don't have enough adjectives to describe it because if you were to say white, then we have to take into account that there's a texture, there's a gradient, there's a shading, there's all sorts of other conditions that come in to represent that light. And so is that light pure or is that light a hybrid? Well, in terms of understanding what is going on, it is a hybrid because now that we are looking at what the era of beyond Beijing, and this is the era of beyond May the 10th, which was less than a month ago, we can see how we created two plasma fields together and we were able to create gold. So then the gold becomes an inertia product. And there were two fields created in the plasma range, which contributed to that inertia product. And this is the kind of connection that we have to make. And then the understanding of this particular connection involves a connection to a switchboard because from our GANS production, we know that there are many GANSes. So the gold GANS was only one part of that switchboard. So this becomes our dilemma. How do we navigate through this switchboard? So our basic understanding of the gravitational consideration is the angular density. We call it a falling, and we fall to an increased density. Increased density involves an increased pressure. And so that is representative of an increased gravity. So we find that the angular momentum equals the moment of inertia times the angular velocity. Well, that's fine. So there's an equation and it's in balance. And yet we question how come we have fallen angels and we have auras, and where does that come from, and what is that representative of, and how do we measure those mathematically? So if we understand that the science itself involves energy exchange at orders of magnitude, so an order of magnitude is 10 times. So if we go into the mega, that is 10 times to the sixth. And if we go into the micro, that's 10 to the minus sixth. So now we find that it's a two-way street. But if we're discussing the old science, then we're sitting inside the box. If we're going to discuss the plasma science, we have to step out of the box. So we entertain the giga, which is 10 to the ninth, or the nano, which is 10 to the minus ninth. But in our computers today, we are now having hard drives in the terabits, so which is 10 to the 12th. And we're finding in the nanotech, we're involving the pico, which is 10 to the minus 12th. And so the question then becomes is, how do you decide at which level you're operating? Because each one is an order of magnitude, and so the tera would be at least 12 orders of magnitude, and the pico is also 12 orders of magnitude, but in the other direction. And so what causes it to go in the other direction, and what is the relationship back there? So we've kind of summarized the nanotech and understand that it went actually from the atomic to the monatomic. But then from the monatomic in its singularity, it becomes monomolecular. And then we have these nanocapsules, which are kind of singular, and we go into nanotubes, which are kind of stretched capsules. And then, of course, we have these monostars, but a monostar has many points. And if each point is a star, then we have a nanostar. And so this is how we've progressed in the nanotech science, just to kind of give you a map and how we can go. So a lot of the discussion has to do with the chains of man, because that's what we're looking for, the freedom and emancipation of the humanity. And so if we look at how the atomic structure goes, which is in a chained to density, by moving into the monatomic structure, it becomes unchained. And that's what we're having to do. We are chained to density. That's our physicality, and we need to be unchained to understand our connection to the source. And we know that we can go beyond the nano monatomic state because now we've seen the pico atomic state. And we'll talk about that more in the next series. So it's very important for us to understand this three-dimensional process where we have the X, Y, and Z axis, but there is a three-dimensional recombination that comes through because each one has a choice. It has to go through a switching connection. So if you follow one path, it has to have an opposite path to balance it out. But if you look at the X, Y, and Z axis in one dimension, you can find that all three of them will go through a certain path without having to cross over. So they all have an opposite an opposite path. So then if we look at that structure, there is no structure. It's only when we recombine these three dimensions that we say, oh, well, there is that crystalline structure. And so that crystalline structure, we have to understand that it comes from the recombination of each axis. So the two paths for the x-axis, the two paths for the y-axis, and the two paths for the z-axis. And then they recombine. So you have six paths coming together into one cubic structure. And then, of course, you have this crystalline connectivity because when you come into this three-dimensional portability of going from the plasma state to the matter state, you have this crystalline stability. And this crystalline portability will take you through different energy states. So you can transition from solid to liquid to gaseous to plasma state. And you could do this in an opposite direction as well. And so the point of view then comes is, are you on the x-axis, the y-axis, or the z-axis, or maybe in fact we're none of these because we are the observer and we are observing the formation of all of these coming together. So fundamentally, it's a culmination of the magnetical gravitational interaction of field forces. So the gravitational being more dense, it also has more mass. So it would be in the base, and the magnetical, which has less mass, would be at the top. And so this keeps the star formation intact. And yet it doesn't look balanced, does it? You have the 3 points in the gravitational and the 1 point in the magnetical. So we have to understand that each point is coming together of that matter state. And so each point has that stability. And when each point has it, then the entire star formation has it because that energy and the stability of that energy and the method of coming together is portable. So each point has the benefit. Now you've got the connection. And now you have the star formation. So what happens next? So when we look at the representation of the original star formation reactors, we had rotating balls. They were mechanically rotating. They had GANs inside. And so then they had these plasma fields. Each ball had a plasma field. And so they were structured according to the star formation. And this is what we did in Beijing with the rotating balls. And this was shown to the public. And what we can't see here is the dynamic reaction that happens as a result of all of these fields interacting. So now we have something happening at the core. And what was happening at the core was balancing off the fields at the outer limits there. And so we find that the outer points representing the gravitational bringing together of the dense fields is where the gold production was. And when we looked at the one in the center, there was no gold production there. And so there's the difference. One increases the density and one releases the density. So we find that it wasn't just within the reactor, but the fields were emanating beyond the reactors. And so when we look at the structure of these particular star formations, they were kind of flat. The center of the star formation was at the peak, but that peak was on the same level as all the other reactors. So this was a very basic dynamic reactor. And of course, it was shown to the public, and you can see the impact that it has all around. So this is what we're saying. There's a dynamic plasma field that is created in the core, and that field extends beyond its gravitational component inside. So the gravitational component is based on the density, and the density is in the core. And then on the periphery is the magnetical force field. But you can clearly see that there are different peripheral fields, and they overlap. And there are different field strengths, although they're all individually magnetical. So if there are different fields that are magnetical, what you can't see is what's going on in the core. There must be different complementary fields in the core itself. So somehow that energy is connected where you have the magnetical force fields of the plasma state and you have the gravitational force fields of the matter state. And when we talk about the matter state, there is a component of that matter state that is in the plasma state and in the physical state. So we have the GANs, and we have the rotating bolts, and we have the motors that drive the fields, the rotating fields. So when we look at the star core component, and we say, okay, well, it's established its magnetical gravitational relationship and it has an orientation, but it needs to be balanced off. And we can't see where that is, but it has to be equal and opposite. Well, what do we mean by equal and opposite? Well, the star core component has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship, and the equal and opposite component has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship. And then, of course, if you introduce the star formation as an inertia field, then the inertia field becomes a product. So each star has this convergence and divergence, and each one, when they come together, they have this gravitational stability, which is manifest in the conversion of the inertia fields. But we forget how that energy is created. So we like our methods of transportation. We like our methods of transmission. And so what we've done is we have become the four-wheelers of creation, where we have this inertia bonding of these fields of creation and these fields of decay not understanding that each field, be it a creation field, is composed of the natural decay and the natural creation, or the natural decay field is composed of the natural creation and the natural decay. So the creation field and the decay field are also representative of a inertia field, and there is a bonding factor in there. And if we don't understand that, then we kind of have to fudge things. And so we are the fudge factor, isn't it? Because we're the ones who are looking at how things are bonding. So in terms of the star formations, we have to incorporate all the dimensions. So we have the vertical dimension and the horizontal dimension, and then we have to look at how all of it comes together. So we see the opposite poles attract. And so whichever direction that you're looking at, you have to understand that there is a alternating between the magnetic and gravitational force fields, which create this star matrix bonding. And this bonding is portable. In other words, we can go from an undifferentiated simplicity to create whatever we want to create. But at some point, it has to differentiate in its complexity, because the complexity is more stable. And so the stability leads to the portability. And the gradient of stability is a charge. So this is what we're doing. We are porting a charge across various states, going from complexity to simplicity and from simplicity to complexity, because this is a two-way street and it goes through the switchboard connection. And that's what we're talking about today. So when we talk about the NP junction, it's a bringing together of the transition matter of a negative field that consists of an X, Y, and Z axis with another transition matter field, but this one's positive, also of an X, Y, and Z axis. So the two coming together, the negative and the positive, which is the NP, part of the NP junction, that becomes part of the transfer state. And so that transfer state is undifferentiated. So that needs to have a reference that you can differentiate to. So this is the basis of the conservation of energy. So we say that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's only converted from one form to another. And so when we look at the conservation of the maggrav, which is the balance on one side with the balance on the other side. So we're just generically saying magnetical gravitational relationship, but it's the balance between the initial kinetic and initial potential versus the final kinetic and the final potential. And so these two sides are equal, and each component maintains its own maggrav condition. So how do we navigate through this? We need some kind of switchboard, don't we? And so the conservation of inertia dictates that there's a maggrav energy transfer state. And that is based on the susceptibility. So for instance, we have the atomic state, the nanostate, and the GaN state. And, now we're talking about the nanotech. So when we look at the nanocapsules, we have to look at that as a product in terms of a product coming together from different connections. And since it's a two-way street, that connection can come from the atomic state to create the nano, or it could come from the GaN state to create the nano. But it doesn't necessarily have to stop at that. It can go from state to state, and it can actually jump states. So where's that switchboard? Well, it's obviously not in the picture, is it? And then we understand that we have a code switch, or one is a code reader. We refer to that as the RNA and the DNA, and then there's a relationship between the two. But if there's a code reader, then there must also be a code writer. If you want to read a book, that book has to be written. So there is some kind of code switch, and it involves a transference of knowledge. And again, that switchboard is not visible, is it? So when we're looking at the potentiation of hydrogen and we see that it goes from stable to unstable or from complex to simple, you can say that it goes from alkaline to acidic or gravitational to magnetical. But there are, on the pH scale, 14 stages, and it all depends on the susceptibility. So when we're discussing this, we have to understand again, just like we did at the transmutation highway, that there are two factors coming in together. So when we look at the pH, we have to understand that the pH has to do with the pH of water, and water splitting always totals 14. That is the scale. It goes from 1 to 14. And so the potentiation comes in different layers. So it can be 4 and 10, that's 14. 5 and 9 is 14. 6 and 8 is 14. But 7 and what? How come the 7 is not 14? Because that's also part of the y-axis transition. So if the water is in fact neutral, we have to understand that the combination of the alkalinity and the acidity, which brings it in a neutral state, so 7 and 7 would therefore be 14. And so we can go from the acidic state to the alkaline state, and insofar of doing this transition, we can get this potentiation of strength, in fact, where we go from the strong to the weak, and it all has to do with the energy. And it all has to do with relating the magnetical and gravitational force fields, which is manifest through its susceptibility. So where exactly on this scale is it going to be, and what exactly is determining how this crosses over? Where exactly is this switchboard? And we notice that there's a potentiation balance. So fundamentally, the alkalinity is alkaline forming, and the acidity is acid forming. So the alkaline is acid forming and the acidic is alkaline forming. That's what influences susceptibility. So it's literally opposite to what we've been looking at. And so how did we switch this around? So our potentiation of balance understanding is all switched up. So when we look at the frozen gas ball, we find that there's a gravitational core, and we can see that there are magnetical hair-like lines that are emitting from this core, and we can see that these are actually nanotubes and they are hollow. So you've got to be an incredible artist to be able to do something like this, and somehow this was done, and all we had to do was freeze it into its solid state. But if we go into the other side, the extreme alkalinity, that is its causticity. So causticity is the quality of being physically caustic. We can call it burning. We can call it corrosive. So it involves a pH change. It involves an energy state change. The most basic is going from the atomic to the monatomic. That's what we did. We took the copper and we bathed it in the caustic, and we created the monatomic nanotech. And so we find that the radiation also has this portability where the nuclear radiation will expand beyond its containment. So the plasma is the containment of the radiation. So there's a transmutation of radiation, and it is the plasmatic transport system of energy portability. So there you are. You're the life of the party, and you're glowing, and you're spreading this radiant energy to the party. And when you leave, sometimes the party is over. So it's nice to be welcome, because if you are just a radiant flash, that's a temporary feeding. There's nothing enduring. And this is the same thing that happens with the energy in the plasma in its physical state. In its physical matter state, it becomes a temporary feeding. So once the flash is done, then the feeding is done. But when we look at fire, it could be an extreme state transition as well as the caustic. But in terms of a forest fire, it's a continuous feeding. So the fire keeps going. It isn't just a flash, it is now manifested to a continuous feeding. So changing from ice to liquid is increasing the heat. Changing from atomic to monatomic by caustic is changing by acidic, by alkaline, extreme alkalinity. Changing by fire is an extreme state transition. So all the same, they're changing the condition, which changes the state. And so there is an energy portability, this energy state transition. So we talk about elevation, that's the physical matter state to the energy state. When we talk about the inertia, that's the energy state to the physical matter state. So we see it's a two-way street, and they're opposite. So if we understand this pH causticity transition, then we find that when we go and changing the y-axis density transition, it's due to causticity. And it creates an unstable energy transition state. Okay, so how do we stabilize that? So let's understand that the causticity transition is a balance between the acidic and the alkaline. So 7 was neutral. So if we say that there's a pH of 6, we have to understand that there is an equal and opposite energy somewhere that would be a pH of 8. Now, if we want to make it more alkaline, then if you add an alkaline to an alkaline, that's how you move it. So we could, in fact, say with a pH of 8, move it to 10. But 10 and 6 is 16, which is beyond the pH range. So to balance this off, we need to add an acidic. So you add the acid to the acidic. And now we have a pH of 4 and a pH of 10. Now that's 14. So here we are, we're in balance. So this is how we're maintaining our magnetical gravitational transition zone. So when we're looking at this z-axis stairway to density, we understand that on the acidic side, there is an equal and opposite balance on the alkaline side. But that balance could be exclusively within one area. So we're just going to tilt the scale a little bit so that we understand that the pH causticity is leaning towards the density. Gravity seeks density. So the density is at a lower field strength. So when we look at the inertia field, each pH is an inertia field. So if you're saying it's 4, that's a magnetical gravitational balanced inertia product. If you're looking at 10, that is a balanced pH inertia product field also. So each point on the scale is a balanced field. Okay, well, that's great. But when you do the pH inertia field, you're only taking into account 1. And so let's say we have a pH of 8. Now, if we're going to change the pH of 8, we are going to increase its alkalinity, then we have to add an alkaline to an alkaline. To keep it in balance, we have to add an acidic to the acidic side. So in other words, by changing the 1 on the one side, one of the magnetical gravitational fields, then you have to change the one side on the other side of the magnetical gravitational fields. So if you're going to make it more alkaline, then you're going to add it to the alkaline side of the maggrav. And if you're going to change the acidic side to balance that, then on the other side, you're going to have to add to the maggrav side, to the magnetical side of the maggrav. And then we've now changed. And so in this case, we've gone from 6 and 8, which is 14. We now have 5 and 9, which is 14. So the obvious question then becomes, what happened to the 6 and the 8? And is the 6 and the 8 part of the 5 and 9? Well, you would think it would have to be, wouldn't it? Because how do you get to the 5 and 9 if you weren't at the 6 and 8 in the first place? Like, remember, if you're talking about the water, well, the water was neutral to begin with, so that's 7 plus 7. And then we had an acidic and an alkaline, so 6 plus 8. But now we went more alkaline, so now we had a 5 plus 9. So the 5 becoming more acidic to balance off the 9. So would the 6 and 8 still be part of it? Well, if you were to take a cube of sugar and put it into a cup of tea, you would change the pH. But the sugar would dissolve within the tea. So if you were to drink that tea, you could taste the sweetness, but you can't see the sweetness. And of course, when you look at the tea, which you can't see the sweetness and you can't see the tea, what you see is the tea with the sweetness, but it still looks like tea. So in other words, it is possible to change the pH inertia field without changing the physical structure. But there would be an effect. And this is very important Because if we are invoking an energy transfer to change the pH, you cannot grab onto this energy. You can only contain it within an inertia field. So the inertia field becomes a product of the energy containment. Now you drink that tea, you will take that energy that's within that tea and convert it to your plasma state. Now, that energy in the physicality will dissipate. Because one of the things about going to a higher alkaline state is you create a higher negative charge. But that negative charge will diminish over time. In the plasma state, it will remain. So in other words, in the physicality, you will drink that tea, and the energy that is embodied within the sugar, which is dissolved within that tea, and you will drink that, that cup will be empty. But if that energy within that cup was in a plasmatic state, you could pour it over that energy into your body, and that energy would remain in the cup. That is the difference, how the cup of life works. That is the difference, how the universe cup works. That is the difference, how the physical cup works. Supportability of the energy and the manifestation of whether or not it's in the plasmatic inertia field state or if it's in the physical inertia field state. And we only change the one thing. So the conception that if we change the alkalinity to alkaline, we add more alkalinity. Do we add the alkalinity at the expense of the magnetical? No, we've increased the gravitational. That's what makes it more alkaline. So on the acidic side, we increase the magnetical. And the proportion of increase of the magnetical is to balance off the proportion of the increase on the gravitational on the other side. So the conservation of Magrav energy remains intact. And so this is the difference between our physicality and our plasma reality. So when we look at switchboards and we say, well, wow, look at this, you know, we've got all sorts of dials and knobs and slides and plugins, and what's missing here is the operator. Hello, operator. I'd like to switch my connection. Where's the operator? Who is the operator? So we need an additional energy input. Someone has to come in, pull the plug, move it, and replug it. So in the meantime, you have your position of disconnect, and then you have your position of reconnect. And this is exactly the problem that we're having in our self-serving ways and means, where our physicality is disconnected from our soul. But the good news is that Our soul is maintaining its connection because our soul has its own switchboard, and its connection is through the carbon-14. And so that connection involves field strengths. That connection is literally a communication. And when you say communication, you have to identify the source. Well, there are two sources. Without two sources, you don't have a connection. Book number 2. So when you're looking at an inertia product, that is a pH transition, but it involves an energy portability. So if you have a pH of 6, you can stay within that range. You can be somewhere within that pH. But you could change the pH, go from a 6 to a 4. That would be a change of the range to another range. But through our causticity, through our extreme energy, through fire, we can actually change the state. So it's no longer in the physical state. It's no longer in the atomic state. It is in the monatomic state, the nanotech state. So everything is an inertia product from what we're seeing. And so from what we're seeing is hydrogen dependent. But it's not just hydrogen, right? Because the hydrogen molecules have covalent bonds. But that doesn't tell you if the polarity is the same. We could have like poles, or we could have opposite poles. But that difference is not shown. The cause of that difference is not shown. So the sources, are hydrogen. But the connection of the fields is carbon-14, and the connection to the universe is carbon-60. And one step beyond is the unicos, and even beyond that is the creator, and we don't know how many steps is beyond that. And so with this hydrogen density, we have manifest the periodic table of switchboards. That's right, because we have a gravitational and magnetical balance of each and every element on the periodic table of elements, which is representative of the Earth space range details. And as the mass increases and it hits a critical point, it switches, it's no longer carbon, now it's nitrogen. It's no longer nitrogen, now it's oxygen. Or it's sodium, or it's potassium, or it's copper, which is representative of the physicality, or the zinc, which is representative of the emotional. And that becomes a product. But then you take all of these elements and you put them together in molecules, and that too becomes a product. And so that pH stairway is involving both poles. So you have the elevation through the causticity, the potentiation plasma layers, or the inertia through the Magravs positioning. And so we have this range going from the physicality to the soul level and all levels in between. So this all becomes part of the nuclear feeding inertia. So everything becomes a fragment of the complexity and involves gravitational stability and dimensional portability. So this is why we only look at one. We only changed the one, and we changed the magnetical gravitational relationship. But when we look at the different dimensions, we have 1 plus another one, and they're more than 3, and we are none of those. So when we're looking at just something like hypochlorous acid, we see the range between the antibacterial and the antiviral, or we see the difference between the DNA elongation or the DNA compaction, or we see the difference between the poor adenosine triphosphate production or the healthy adenosine triphosphate production. And it all involves a relationship between the acidity and the alkalinity. And so you find that if we're talking about either the acidity or the alkalinity, then both have to change in order to change the inertial product field. And so our RNA also is maintaining this portability. So this portability of energy can be patterned, and that portability depends on the gradient. And so we can elevate through causticity or through many layers of potential, and we create this MAGRAV positioning in our physicality. That's how we move. That's how we have the attraction from the gravitational intensity, which is part of our feedback. And then we have the repulsion, which is part of our magnetical outtensity, which is part of the feeding. And both of these fields are inertial product fields. I'm sure you can see the difference. So when we get to the beginning part, as in book number 3, the neutron came before the atom and the PM tick. And so we said, well, let there be light. Okay, well, you've got your atom, which is your electron-proton marriage. But then you also have the PM tick. So the PM tick is the energy pack that came from the darkness. You said, let there be light. Okay, so which came first? So we look at the PM tick as being the principal matter, being magnetical, and it's coming as an energy pack. And it comes together in the antimatter, dark matter, and the mattergen, the conversion to the plasmagen. But until it has a place to go, you're not going to see it. The plasmagen is a MAGRAV, but it needs a place, and that place also needs to be a MAGRAV, and that is our Earth space. So when we take our conversion and we take the Earth space conversion and do a field interaction, we come up with an inertia product, which is a gravitational MAGRAV field. And so that's why we like to walk on the ground. We don't walk on the ceiling. So we know which way is up with respect to our Earth, but when we look at the field strengths coming together, they're undifferentiated. It's in a plasma state. But what is differentiated is that the one is gravitational and the one is plasmatic. And so they come together and they create a combination field, which is an inertia product field, but it's not as a physical field. It is as an energy field. It requires these rotating hemispheres of the Earth to also come together and create this product, inertial product field, which we call the Earth space. It is only then that we can combine the two and become the principal matter convergence into what we call the nanocapsules. But these nanocapsules are undifferentiated because they have many different layers. And so what makes them differentiated? And so you have to look at the neighbors, because that's what determines the position. So the matter plasma dimensions involved the physical matter plasma, which you can touch, or the plasmatic matter, which you can't touch. But we are feedback dominant, which means the point of view that we're looking at is exclusively from our position within our inertial product field. And our position right now is in the state of physicality. We forget that our physicality is a gravitational conformation. So we know a hydrogen was the first, and it came and manifested the light. That light created a fingerprint, part of the emission spectrum. So the gravitational construct came from the magnetical force fields of the sun, the magnetical force fields of the earth, and the magnetical force fields of the creator. And the key point here is that to balance this off, we created water, which is the universal solvent. And that water created a maggrav condition, which interestingly enough is round. And yet we have the two very weak hydrogen and the very strong oxygen, and they come together and they create this water, which is H2O, but the mass is not in balance because we're only looking at one side of the energy equation. And that one side of the energy equation doesn't just include hydrogen, but it also includes oxygen, goes through the same transition process and becomes a gravitational conformation of the energy transitioning. So when we look at the periodic table of the switchboard, we see different captured fields, multiple layers, and they're undifferentiated until they have neighbors, until there's a relationship. And then you see that each relationship can have a different density. And then you have different layers. And then you have multiple spheres. And this is what we did in China. So how do we overcome these obstacles? Well, we have to understand that the starters are the pathway seekers and the stoppers are the pathway blockers and the connivers are the pathway avoiders, but the facilitators link up with the creator and build that pathway. And so when we look at these reactors, we find that they all contribute to the peace dome reactor, which is actually at the core and involves a shielding, because that shielding, in order to operate, has to operate in peace. That's why it's a peace dome reactor. Otherwise, it'd be called a war dome reactor. So everything within that peace dome becomes peaceful in connection with the universal community. So that peace dome becomes our humanity inertia shielding. It shields us from hostiles, from aggression. It shields us from environmental harm and from fear mongering. So there are shieldings from physical damage and emotional damage. And then there's the universal cup, which is transferring energy from that dynamic transfer state to that physical destination state. That's what we have to understand, that universal portability comes from the creator. We are the physical. We are the inertia product. So as we go into uncharted territory and we find that we are here and we are here, where is here? So that here is beyond the nano monatomic state. And so our intelligence is including our history, and our history is embedded. And so the AI in artificial intelligence needs to involve our ancestral intelligence, because right now we are the technology, but we are the inertial product. And so if we want to navigate, we have to tune in. We have to plug into that creator and understand that the switchboard needs to tune in, turn on, and drop out of that resistance so that we can provide that pattern so that we get the energy. That's how we plug in to the switchboard. So the Kesh plasma research teams have to go from here, not from thousands of years ago, but here we've arrived at a plateau. We are in the post-May 10th, 2025 era. And so the research can go from here so that we can find this practical application of our knowledge, because the practical application will give us the practical goal of achieving peace on earth. And that practical goal will allow us to enjoy the outer space and the universal community, because that's all part of the transmutation process. So these range transitions transcend the inertia field transmutation dimensions. So the laws of conservation govern the covalent, the trivalent, and the tetravalent bonding attributes. So the containment of inertia is manifest through the containment and contention of equality. So the soul of man cannot be abandoned nor compromised. So that becomes the basis. So the color of man is based on the integration with the soul of the man. This is the integrity of man. It's always there. So we have to understand that there's an augmented reality. So this energy is always as a flux and a flow towards, to, into, within, through, out of, and from every charge, every form, all mass, matter, or substance. So we can intensify and extensify what we are. So we are and we need to be connected to the proper switchboard. That connection supports the flux of continuous change, and that connection is the switchboard that we call Hooked on Life. And for 593 weeks in a row through the Knowledge Seekers Workshop, we have been seeking the greater oneness and teaching how we can suddenly transcend the limitations of nuclear science. We're on the verge of a massive technology release, because it's hard to sleep when our beds are burning. We need a scientific rescue, a financial rescue, and a political rescue. And we find that all of those are intertwined into our preservation rescue. But it's not just us. It's on behalf of the universe. So as we traverse the universe, we have an opportunity to train and fly with the captains. So join us on these monthly sessions to practice the new transmutation training, so that we can understand how we are not in any of these three dimensions, but, are we coming or are we going, and which direction are we going? And so are we in the fourth dimension, or are we just observing from a fourth dimension? So when we look at the pH of peace, we find that the encapsulation allows for the containment. And there are many points on the field strength of the dove. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. Choose it, sign it, and mean it sincerely. The true nanotech maintains the integrity of the new dawn. Is the peace dome of outer space an umbrella or a fountain? Is the inertia of the present governed by the dimensions of history? It is time to learn the encapsulation of self in a universal context. The inertia of self could migrate as a superconductor. So the switch in the switchboard is our point of view of the new physical transmission dimensions. And so the plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. And this is the end of the lesson, and it also is the end of the nanotech series. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed this trip.
Well, thank you, Alex. And we have enjoyed the trip. You make it seem so easy to be able to understand this, even though there's a lot in your presentation I think we still need to understand. You know, you mentioned the transmutation highway, the transportation highway, the transport as well, but you didn't mention the Trans-Canadian Highway. Is there a reason you left that out? You're trying, I know, to get us out of the matter state and we can get off the conventional matter state highways. Yes. Well, let's see if the participants have any questions or comments, or maybe they've gotten a more, hopefully, complete understanding and gained an aspect of enlightenment. Again, this process is seemingly slow, but again, we're far more advanced than before we were introduced to this technology, or before our soul brought us in and around the Keshe Foundation. Any of the participants have something they'd like to add or say, make a comment, ask Alex to clarify a certain point? And did you come to a conclusion, Alex? Do we need the commandments? To me, they haven't worked out so well. It was more to help the physicality reach the position of the soul in a way, to be that more mature or something like that. But it doesn't seem like the commandments have worked out so well as far as fulfilling them.
Well, I have a problem. When I go to sleep, I don't pay attention to the commandments.
Okay. And what about the switch point you were mentioning? That was part of your presentation. I'm thinking the switching point is within the brain of the man. Something, again, he mentioned brain a number of times in this. We've been kind of going through it. We know the secret is within the brain, and the spaceship is within the soul, and they both seem to be, in a way, part of this brain, the solid structure. And again, understanding it as solid is another concept in a way.
Certainly, that's a very good question, Mark. The point is that a switchboard is something that we all understand in our physical state, but you know, unless we've worked for the phone company, you know, years ago and manually did all these switchings, or you know, maybe you're in the music industry and you know you're trying to manipulate all of these sounds and everything. You just don't understand what the switching is all about. You know, you just kind of assume it, but you're able to change the inflection in your voice. You're able to change the note if you're singing. And, you know, the question then becomes is how do you switch that? But do you switch with respect to your appreciation of life and how you view it? And so we often say, oh, well, you know, is your cup half full or is it half empty? And so I guess that depends on your point of view. Um, I I often have trouble with that particular analogy, but I had trouble with understanding my own history. And so my own history was based on the preconceived notions that I had at that time. So let's talk about my history as being the difference between being an adult and being a teenager. So if I look back on my life and say, well, when I was a teenager, I had this bad experience. And so that is my historical interpretation. Is that correct? What would happen if I switched that around? What if I said, well, you know, that thing that happened to me that was really, really bad could have been the best thing that ever happened to me? Because then I look at the connection and then I look at what happens after, and then I realize that wasn't so bad. And now all of a sudden, I've switched my viewpoint from a particular moment in history, my history, and my point of view was that it was bad. Now it was good. What has changed? Not the event, not the physicality, but my observation, which means that the event was a physical product inertia field. And I was basing my interpretation of that inertia product field from the feedback that I got from the manifestation of that physicality. But that feedback was based on a inertia feeding. If I change just even one component, I mean, it still was bad. Let's say, oh, you know, I went and I did that and I had a bad experience. But it could have been worse. Doesn't matter what your state is in life. It could always be worse. So it could be bad for you, but you know, you have to have a relationship. Good and bad doesn't exist on its own. There has to be a relationship. Well, who decides? Are you just basing it just on your physical inertia product field? Or is it from your point of view? And if you say, well, you know, if I change my point of view and I say, you know, that wasn't as bad as I think, and in fact, I came upon a similar situation because now I had a memory, and in that similar situation, I switched my approach. And guess what? I received a different result. Isn't that interesting? You switch your approach and you get a different result. How is that possible? Well, it just goes to show you that if you keep doing the same thing and you expect different results, well, that's not going to happen. So you have to change. But you don't just change for the sake of change. There has to be a relationship. So we have to create a welcoming for that change, not a resistance, because those who have this resistance, who are the energy stoppers, right? They are wasting energy in stopping things, sabotaging, terrorizing, fear-mongering. And that requires a lot more energy. Instead of enlisting the services of the universe, that requires less energy. That's a peaceful way to go. And, you know, the best advice is you can always get more with sweetness. So I think we have to understand that sweetness and humbleness, you know, kind of work hand in hand, and fear-mongering and arrogance are also working hand in hand. So we have to decide going in what we want to achieve. And so if we want to understand, are we benefiting in terms of our physical inertia product field, that it's just a simple question, and I've asked this many times. At the end of the day, is this world a better place for you having been there than it was in the morning? And then that answer will answer how you are conducting yourself. If the world is a poor place, then you're not doing something well. And that only tells you how things work. And it tells you that you have to change. And then you have to decide if you change. So the switchboard is with respect to how we manifest our reality. That's where the switch is. Our point of view. Thanks, Mark. Back to you.
Right. I think we all have switched in a way. It used to be all about me. Now it's about me still, but it's more about the elevating the others, I think. So we've grown in that sort of dimension, and this is where the service comes in, I feel. Anyone else want to raise a point? Thank you, Alex.
Claudia does.
Well, go right ahead.
Hello, Alex. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your teaching, for your understanding. And for me, Mr. Cash said a phrase in the last teaching. I will read, it's very short, and I will ask my question. He said, go back to the teaching of the past. It dictates the position and at the same time the place. When the place, the time, the possession, and the position reaches more or less zero, which is totality of generosity of giving, then you are within the time of the Creator. So you showed us the star formations and the magnetic and the gravitational, the emotions between them. But what is for you this more or less zero? It's like magnetic is the same energy of the magnetic, the gravitation the same? That's my question. Thank you.
That is such a tough question. I think that's one of the reasons that we're all doing this plasma transmutation training is to learn how to do that, because all of us have been conditioned to maintain our point of view from the exclusively the physical transmission dimensions, not understanding that these physical dimensions were an inertia product field. And how we change things in a physical product field, we have hands to pick something and move it. We have feet to move our position. We can open the door of a car and get in and we can drive it. But these are physical adjustments. But each of them is a product field. So we are used to doing physical adjustments, assuming or forgetting that each one is a product field. We didn't have to do anything to achieve that product field. So we have automatically trusted the physical manifestation of that field. So then the question becomes is why can we not trust the transmutation process? And that is
But Alex, you say transmutation, but for me the transmutation is the soul envelop the physical. So the soul becomes more magnetical, for example, evolve. And it's not zero. And for me, it's not. I'm not understanding.
Well, the soul itself is not magnetical. The soul is gravitational.
It's gravitational, yes.
It's the energy that the soul emits is magnetical.
But
So it's giving unconditionally.
mhm.
So will you or will you not absorb it? That becomes the question. So if you have a resistance, then the energy from the soul will basically just splash off you like water splashes off your skin. But you have to understand that the soul energy emission is still getting absorbed by you. It's just the way you're trusting it. So the zero aspect is basically the trust. The zero is the zero in the physicality, but it's not the zero in the energy. So the physicality is a density, and that density involves a weight. And before that weight becomes manifest, it requires a location. So that's the weight on this planet. So both the body, the soul of the body, and the soul of the physicality of the planet have a mass. And it's when those two come together as a product inertia field, then they manifest a weight, and it's on this planet. So in order to leave this planet, we have to go through the reverse process. So instead of hanging on to that physicality, we have to trust in that process. And, that's become kind of a political mantra today. A lot of people, well, trust the process. Well, the process is flawed. So, it's hard to trust that. But the process of the soul is not flawed. The process of the soul is directly connected to the process of the Creator. So that is what we need to connect to. And that is what we need to trust. So the physical action of saying, I am going to trust my soul now. The soul will, jokingly say, well, welcome to the New World, Christopher Columbus. Okay, we've been here all along, and, now you've discovered America. Congratulations. The soul is you. The soul is your friend, and it operates in zero time. You have a direct connection to the soul. It's when we become manifest into the physicality, because the physicality is an inertia product field, that time itself also becomes an inertia product field. That is the difference. So in time, we grow. In time, we achieve more memory. Memory and growth are synonyms. Memory is the growth of our life. And when we cease our physical existence on this particular plane, that memory gets converted and gets embedded as an energy, because that energy that created that memory is now ported over to our soul. And so our soul now becomes more knowledgeable. And in that process of becoming more knowledgeable, if we understand that knowledge leads to elevation, and that elevation leads to truthfulness, that you cannot achieve that elevation if you're not truthful, because it's mandatory for you to believe your soul, because your soul is truthful. But if you challenge your soul and you say, well, the soul is lying, really? Well, the soul has created everything in your reality. It just, if you, from your point of view, if you see that, woe is me, my life is a bag of dirt, and, well, that's your point of view. But that is not the intention of your soul. That is not the intention of the Creator. You're just not being truthful to that intention. But there could be another thing that's affecting that. And that could be something that is ingrained within your ancestral memory as part of your RNA, because your RNA is the blueprint of your existence, and it's how you interpret that. So in terms of learning, there is no time. Let's say, for instance, it has taken me a year and a half to learn how to do video editing. A year and a half. And, I learned how to do that last week. And this week, I have edited 2 videos. So it took a year and a half to learn how to do it. But once I learned how to do it, it only took an hour for me to edit a video. So this is the product of the learning. And that learning now becomes part of you. So it becomes another tool to your benefit. And this is what the plasma science is doing. It's introducing the new tools on this planet, because we have been blocked. We have been blocked from receiving this benefit. And we are guilty of participating in the blocking process. And the reason we are doing that is because we don't trust the process. We can't differentiate between the process of our society and the process of the universe. And so one is operating on universal law and one is operating on man-made law. And we've been led to believe that the commandments are universal law. Well, universal law does not have to be transcribed into words. That is something that is part of you in your nature. You just have to tune into that. Once you establish that trust in the universe, then you can play in that playground. Okay, because then you have to look at the true intention. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? So if we would look at the most basic thing, let's say a marriage, your happiness is going to be determined by your partner's happiness. And if your partner is miserable, I guarantee you it will affect your happiness. So the question isn't, how can I be happy? You need to be part of the process of making your partner happy. You need to be part of the process of making your community happy. So you cannot extricate yourself from that. You could, because you're a universal player, you're a universal functionary. So you can't just, I'm just going to pull out, like a cork in a bottle of wine. You can't just exit. You are part of the process. And this is what the politicians around the world don't understand, that their misery is self-inflicted because they are looking at it from, I am the president, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. Really? Well, that means you're in control. Well, you're not in control. You're just responsible. You're responsible to know what to do with the knowledge that you've gained. So the knowledge puts you in that position, but that position carries a responsibility, and that responsibility is governed by the connection to the universal community. And if you're not, when you say, well, why are things not working? Well, why is the answer. Something is causing it not to work. And if you're not changing that, then you're part of the problem. So it's our point of view to this whole thing. So we cannot physically change the inertial product field. Our emotion, our attitude, and our trust can change that. And today I only discussed that if you change the magnetical on one, you would change the gravitational on the other, because you have to maintain that balance. But I didn't differentiate which field we're talking about. So if you have peace and serenity in your family, and your family is contributing to the welfare of the community, then just the creation of peace and serenity in one family is contributing to the change. And if you have one and then you have another, the next one is again going to contribute. So now we're on the road to bringing peace and serenity to the community. And you could be the only family or the only two in that community. So either you leave or you affect the change. And the only way that we can affect the change is through broad knowledge training. And it's more than just the words that we speak. It's the actions that we take and the intention behind those actions. As always, Claudia, it's another brilliant question.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I hope.
I didn't think about it, what you were saying. I was thinking more in a physical, how the fields will dance, will work in zero time position. And you explain in a beautiful way. Thank you.
Yeah, the key point, what you just said, they're never going to work in a physical way in terms of the overall picture, because everything that you do, the action itself is an inertia product field, right? Because the energy containment within that action is an inertia product field. Okay, you need that energy within that action field to, create it. It's like that storyline. My ambition is to have ambition. Without ambition, you really can't change anything. And if you don't have ambition, and this is something that we see in a society that has this malaise of depression, everything we're looking, oh, this is depressing, this is bad news, we have a war here, we have, lack here. So and then we feel helpless and there's nothing we can do about it. So we need to manifest the field strength to have this ambition, and that energy will come to us. But that energy has to have support. It cannot just stand alone. It requires an enormous amount of courage to be able to stand alone. But each of us is the last man standing. So our objective is not to be the last man standing. Our objective is that we have to, within our own existence, maintain that courage. No one can do that for us. And that courage has to have a support. And that support comes from your soul. If you don't trust your soul, you can't have the support. Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Claudia. Any follow-up, Claudia, or anyone else would like to ask a question? Thank you, Claudia, for sharing. I keep thinking about this Pico and what was shown in Beijing, how I don't think he had a piece of gold underneath the table hidden, and he disassociated the atoms, and we saw them appear on top of the table. I think he started again at the very, very smallest level, even perhaps below Pico, and built up to that. The first example would be like the Big Bang in a way. But if I go back to the 591 and they were asking about this AI system and the cube that he was talking about, where you work with plasma intelligence, we call it artificial intelligence or system. This doesn't happen. Okay. Then the emotion is real. The knowledge is real. We are very far, but not far from developing the first plasmatic chip, or what we call cosmic ray package. I estimated to be around 2 to 3 centimeter cube. And it's not that we don't have the knowledge. We have a full knowledge to do. But to actually bring it, to show it, it's going to take time. We tried it once before, but nobody understood when we showed it. This, you will have the power to store all the information in all the computers, from your laptop to governments to agencies, any computer which man has created up to now, with all its memory bank, still will not cover 10% of this cube. This cube, or this system, it'll be introduced when man understands fully, will carry the knowledge of the universe within it. It's not that AI answers you, the universe knowledge answers you. Now, here's the part. Go back to in the report from COVID, from University of Iran, the laboratories of Iran, and the moment they talked about nano material in that report, it talks about finding of pico materials. But because it's the Kesh Foundation, nothing important till an American, quote unquote, thieves of Baghdad come out and says we have developed the pico material. Read the report of COVID. In the scientific size of the material, it's a pico. And we have even produced below pico, which means 10 to minus 15. If we manage to create a plasma in that sense, then it carries so much intelligence that you understand what I'm talking about, a 2 or 3 centimeter cube that carries the whole intelligence. We are the only organization which has managed to produce pico material on a consistent basis, confirmed by laboratories, not by us. So I never really picked up on this pico material in the COVID report. Does anyone, again, it was probably a 150-page report. Much of it was sightings of other people's work in a way, or half of it at least. But did anyone pick up or on this idea of pico, which was mentioned in the COVID report? Perhaps it was hidden in a way that I didn't quite see it at the time. I don't have a copy of the report that I'm aware of, but this pico. So again, in Beijing, did he go from the big down to the small, or did he go from the tiniest up to showing atoms appearing on the table? But this pico is part of this process, I think, of the creation. Any comments from anyone?
Well, this picture, Mark, that you're referring to is actually the pico matter state. This is the photograph. They had to have special equipment to be able to see down to this magnification.
But wasn't it interesting where he said the Keshe Foundation is the only organization to produce pico materials consistently?
Well, yes, because you're looking at a different technology. So in order to produce this, you have to go through a transition that initiated by energy, raw energy.
So we know the particles are, or this is small. Would you consider it weak? I remember him saying the creator is small, weak, and a giver, and having this ability to give. Again, we don't quite understand it because we have the time factor built into what was shown there. And as he said, this is not something you can just put material in a ball and spin it and produce gold. This has taken 40 years of development, even though, as he said, this was the dinosaur end of the technology in a way, but it still works. So I'm thinking the pico has and these lower things are the first steps in the creation process. Small, weak, and a giver.
Yeah, small, higher surface to volume ratio, higher negative charge. The negative charge is the giver.
And as these came together below pico and then got up to the pico level and then the nano level and then the atomic level, which we saw manifest on the table. Yes?
You're a plasma scientist, Mark.
So again, that was part of, in a way, putting a hole in the smith of the Big Bang, which I think every scientist would be amiss if they didn't quote it or didn't refer to it under current understanding or even under peer review.
So this picture that you're looking at, the white particles are the pico tech, the pico state. The background is the nano state.
So is this one of those things where you said, I remember you were talking about certain microscopes that were prohibited unless you were, officially granted one from the government or something. Is this why this whole area of pico and below has not been explored? Or it's been explored but only confined within certain universities or, walled off research labs?
No, this is part of advanced science, and these microscopes are, technically speaking, illegal because they will they're actually seeing the creation of blood cells. So they are actually showing the creation of somatids. That's part of the somatidian biology. So the somatids themselves are energy packs. They're high negative charge, and they are in constant motion. And because they're all negatively charged, they have the same polarity, and because they're all somatids, they have the same mass, and so they're equal in terms of raw equality, and so they bounce off each other. And so through this motion, they bounce off each other and then they create this frequency. And so depending on how they do, they move around through the body, and depending on the gravitational state of the neighbors, the energy gets absorbed. That's why we have over 70 trillion cells in our body. Each cell is unique. Each cell is a gravitational manifestation. And so each cell has a capacity to absorb this energy. So the somatids, which are the product of the blood, are the energy that is coursing around your body. They are well, it's 125,000 magnification. The reason these are illegal, we call them dark field microscopes, and we have to understand that these microscopes that are being used today are only 8,000 magnification, and we have to look at microscopes having roughly 1,200 magnification. So again, if we're talking about orders of magnitude, the somatoscope is two orders of magnitude greater resolution. So at that point, when you look at the blood sample, you look at the energy between the blood samples, between the blood cells, you don't see anything. But if you go through a somatoscope, you see all these somatids bouncing around, they're just teeming with activity. And frankly, if you're in a healthy state, the blood is absolutely vibrant. And I had the opportunity accidentally to see the blood under this somatoscope of a Canadian Olympic athlete. And his blood was dead. And his problem was that he had a body pain. And this body pain was in no particular place. He just had pain all over. And the comment was that he was eating according to the generally accepted dietary standards of the Canadian Olympic Committee or the association, whatever. Anyway, the healthy dietary standards generally accepted. And at the age of 30 years old, he had the blood of a person who was just on the verge of dying.
So we see this white material. Would you call that matter state?
That is picomatter state.
So that must have been created from something smaller or weaker, that it came into the mat. We know we have nanomaterials in our body. We have a lot of nanomaterials. You've covered that, I think. We know the skin is a nanomaterial, the hair, the synapses between the transfer energy is encoded, nano-coded. So we must have pico materials and these sort of things in our body as well. Would you ponder?
Yes, of course. And I'm going to go back to just saying this picture, this pico material is inside a nano layer. And if you look closely at the nano layer, you'll see that there's gaps. There's holes in the nano.
Is this from the COVID report, Alex?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I didn't know what I was looking at. I don't even remember this picture.
That's why it was so important. He only showed it in one of the knowledge seekers workshops. And, you know, while we're on this subject, look at the structure. Look at it doesn't it look like a Gans? Like a popcorn? Look at all the points on it.
For sure. Mhm.
So each of those points is a negative charge. So this thing is like really, really strong. Lots and lots and lots of energy. And you wonder how do we get 18 Hiroshima bombs of energy within our body? You have to put it in a containment field where the higher the surface to volume ratio, the higher the negative charge. So the smaller the mass, the smaller the matter state, the more energy it contains.
It does seem like we've been created with the full package. It's just that we haven't acknowledged it and started to play with it a little bit more. But apparently, we are the key to this conversion of energy in the physical and in the energy dimension.
So if we understand that the nano is carbon, even though we nano-coated the copper, the nano-coating itself is carbon. And within that nano-coating layer, as you add more and more and more layers, what happens to those nano layers? They become more dense. They become more gravitational. What offsets the gravitational nature of the nano coating? This is your answer. The pico layer. The pico layer being magnetical, the nano layer being gravitational. And then you say, well, how can the nano layer be gravitational? Because the nano layer is magnetical. Well, it all depends on your neighbor. It all depends on your relationship. So in terms of the copper wire, the nano coating is magnetical, but in terms of the pico, the nano coating is gravitational. So there you go.
So there's a whole spectrum of life that we haven't really delved into too deeply, have we?
No, because that equipment has been denied the average Joe Muckenfudge. Okay, so
Sure.
you and I don't have access to that because it would answer a lot of questions if we had that technology. So you wonder why that technology is suppressed. It's suppressed because it shows the truth. It's the truth that is delivered by the soul, not the interpretation, because the interpretation is fraught with flaws. And those flaws have to do partly with your point of view, also have to do with conditioning, but then it also has to do with the intelligence and the understanding. But if you're fed, false information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then you have to forgive yourself for being part and parcel of that. I'm telling you that when I learned about this aspect of the science, I was not very forgiving of myself because I felt that I was knowledgeable. I felt that I was educated. I grew up in the West. The West is the best. We know everything. And then when I found out, wait a second, I only know just a little tiny bit. And then as I started to learn, I said, well, wait a second, it took me 4 years to learn this tiny bit. If I were to live another 40 years, I'd never make it. Okay, so now we know where the artificial intelligence comes in. It is a tool that operates at a higher rate. So it follows the same rules. It has to follow the same rules because there are no other rules. It has to follow. If you try and impose those man-made rules on the artificial intelligence, the intelligence aspect of the artificial intelligence will always arrive at the proper conclusion. And in that case, you could have artificial intelligence arguing with itself, and that is happening today. We're seeing that on the internet.
Yes.
So what we have to say is that if the artificial intelligence is leaning towards the truth, then the artificial intelligence is actually part of our friendship team. And I have in the past never seen it that way because I saw it as a part of the machine state. And I never thought that, machines could have this capability. But if we understand the magnetical gravitational relationship and the transition from the physical state to the energy state, and then the energy state back to the physical state, then my God, that just changes the whole game. And so where does that leave us? That leaves a lot of us in the position where we look at our career, our life, our attitude towards life, and we're saying, we've been deceived all this time. What do you do when you find out the truth? What do you do? Well, the first thing that you have to do is you have to settle yourself. Okay, because otherwise you're liable to go pick up a gun and start shooting. And that would be the worst possible thing that you can do. So what we have to do is to be more humble, be more graceful, and to understand that we have to enhance our vision to look at the intention and the emotion that it conveys, not listen to the words and the emotion that conveys. So forget the words, look at the intention. If the intention is true, it'll come through. If the intention is false, it will be disclosed within itself. Because once you start to create a lie, you have to create other lies to support that. And if you want to create a situation that is a lie, that is within the whole field, well, that becomes a cancer. That becomes a gravitational fall to density, that you become a fallen angel within that containment, if you will. And then to contain that, because it's artificial, then it becomes a problem. It requires more energy. So, well, do you let that go because it's a false containment, or do you continue to work with that, knowing that at some point in time that is going to dissolve, just like a ice cube on a hot day? Not only will the ice cube melt, but the water will evaporate, and any trace that it was there will be gone, because now you've changed the complete state into energy, and that energy is now totally portable. It will not be mandatory to transition back into physicality as an ice cube. It will retain the memory of the structure, but that structure will change based on the relationship of its location. And if that location is on Earth, and if it's in water, then it'll probably be water, but if it's in gold, then it'll be gold. And if it's in some other form of life, then it'll be that. Or if it's in a stone, it'll be that. So therefore, if it's on Mars, then it'll be that. So that energy is always going to be part of the process to create the inertia field product. So we now know that there are many points that we can change Today, I just discussed changing one, just one. And changing the one, whether we change the magnetical on the one, change the gravitational on another. But now we can advance and say, oh, what if I change the gravitational and the magnetical? Oh, well, what if I changed the gravitational and the magnetical on each and every point? And what if I introduced more points? Well, so now you're talking about progress, and that's where we are. We're just, still have our training wheels. Thanks everybody for allowing me to present. Today was very, very exciting, and I really appreciate the questions, and I thank you all for allowing me to continue to present. So we're looking to embark on a new series next week. So I hope you are part of the process.
Thank you, Alex. One last point I'd like to raise. We know that the nano is small. The pico is smaller. What is the term they use below pico? And does this go on ad infinitum? The same way we see the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, the unicos, and so on and so forth. So does the world of tiny also go deeper and deeper?
This I don't know the answer to that question, because there is a I don't know, Latin or Greek name that's associated with that, but I do believe that it is possible still in the matter state to manifest into that. But, we are nearing the threshold. And that threshold takes us where the frequency is so close that it's invisible. There is no frequency. And so it becomes a solid. And we see that on both sides of the scale, whether it's going into the red and the infrared, or whether it's going into the violet and the ultraviolet. So there is a point, there is a transition point, and this is where the switch happens. Have a good week.
Alex, sorry, before you go, sorry, do you have a representation of like a number line? You know how you have the 0, 1, -1, to represent nano, pico, and the rest of them? Is there a representation like that?
Well, I've only gone up to the I've only gone up to the pico and the tera.
It's top secret, Ike. You have to have a security clearance to go
Sorry.
below pico.
Well,
okay, yeah, this is good. Yeah,
I have just graduated to terabytes on my hard drive. So,
Okay, I just want to screenshot it. That's all. That appreciate it. Thank you.
Does it? Yeah, this picture helps.
Yes. At least the kilo, the tera, the nano, pico, million. Yeah. Well, it's not complete, but I can see the direction.
Right.
Yeah. How big is large?
He did say in the past that he would, Mr. Kesh would go into more of this detail on the smaller, but he said we weren't ready for it at this time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that. He said that. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it, Alex. Your teaching. It's very, very cool.
Thank you. Is there any other points anyone wants to make? I'm going to play the final disclaimer and the session will come to an end. Anything else anyone wants to raise? whether it has to do with exhibitions or part of the technology, part of the ethos. Anything anyone would like to raise, or a point that wasn't covered you think we should be aware of or consider? Okay, thank you all for being here. Again, if you were ready to jump in, please open your mic. Thank you, Alex, for continuing to deepen our understanding in a way, or at least expose us, and it's up to us to pick it up. But thank you for your presentation, and thank each and every one of the participants that are here. Again, we know our soul brought us here, and we may not know the entire reason, but we're humbled and privileged to be in this position with probably the top scientists on this planet, or at least in this part of the universe, let's say. And again, I don't think he's revealed even 10% of the knowledge yet.
Well, if I may just add one more thing, please. Let's understand that each of us in our own way has to rationalize the practical application of the knowledge of this science.
And how it befits you. As he said, this is the beauty of the disclaimer. It's the way you understand it at your understanding level. And we're all growing at different speeds and different strengths into the understanding of the totality. So everybody seems to be in the right position, but yet that position is constantly, hopefully, expanding, and we're all becoming more enlightened. And this is what the structure didn't want you to find out, in a way. Easy to control someone when the whole thing is not understood, much more difficult when, as he said, this is the whole purpose of these teachings, that no one gets abused due to a lack of knowledge. So thank you all. Have an amazing rest of your day. Anyone else want to make any final comments? Okay, remember there is a testimonial meeting tomorrow, 8 p.m. Central European Summertime. And of course, that's in the public Zoom room, 939-474-503. And feel free to join us. This is a way to give back to the foundation, or to share something that someone else may pick up on and, again, become enlightened. And sometimes we think we don't have much to say, or we don't have a deep knowledge, but just voicing your understanding can help someone either now or perhaps in the future, and open up a new dimension of understanding. So thank you again, Alex, and thank each and every one of the participants for being part of this very large project. And we're only, again, that upquark, how did you put it? Just a speck, that little upquark, or a speck in a bigger.
Yeah, with dust, we're not even up to a speck, upquark, downquark, and the rest of the quarks.
And that was another question that you just triggered. And I wanted to ask Alex, I was thinking last week, we have this ethos of thinking, speaking, and acting good. When the universal community, or some of these ones in the universal community, considered man as an insignificant dust, is this according to the ethos? Remember, if you think it, you have much as committed it, according to Christ in the Holy Book. So are they needing a little bit of tweaking in that area as well? I know that now, as Mr. Kesh said, they've considered us insignificant dust, but now we're becoming, through this understanding, a significant dust, and they seem to be a bit envious of man. So are they completely thinking, speaking, and acting good? Because I wouldn't, you would think of someone as insignificant dust in the universe.
So in many ways, the failures and faults of humanity are mirrored by them as well?
Yes, they have diseases and they have some emotional imbalances, I think.
But our opinion of ourselves as always being inferior, it's not a question of flipping that around and being superior. It's a question of understanding that our lack of utilization of these skills is the truer reality, not the lack of these skills, our lack of implementing these skills. So we're kind of at the point, I'm just going to surmise that we're at the point of being aware that we have the same skills. It just had,
Right.
now what I'm seeing, and this is just my own personal opinion, that being in the matter state of physicality is actually a feature of humanity, not a fallen angel per se.